Dr. Ruth Appelhoff, who's executive director of the Guildhall Museum, and we've just been listening to this panel together talking about creativity. It was really exciting for me, too, to listen to the exchange. So I wonder what strikes you. You're dealing at Guildhall with so many creative people, and you've done that all your life.
Yes, I have, yes, yeah.
So what is it that strikes you about the idea that we are all creative?
As they began to talk, I think I began to examine my own life, as I'm sure everyone else did that was sitting here listening. And I think we all have that creative impulse, and we're all reaching towards some kind of fulfillment before we die. We want something, make some kind of contribution.
I was thinking about this line, and I don't even remember what poem it's from. It's by Robert Warren, and he describes love as a reaching Godward though blind. Love is a reaching Godward though blind. And I think that is, pretty good way to describe this impulse to create.
Lois said once that we should all strive to be something more than mere tubes for food.
We are more than bellies and reproductive machines and intellects. No matter what the scientific arguments support, all that will last and speak to the future will be the art forms, good and bad.
I think we're very fortunate that there are people, outsider artists in this case, that seem to have the courage to go beyond what is expected of them.
Courage comes from stepping into the new territory. And I wonder if that strikes anybody.
It makes me think of Lois Wilson talking about, I will no longer be a ditto artist, copying other people's artistic styles and their concepts. And she actually attempted to get rid of all of her training in her head and get back to where a child would be, or where a folk artist would be, self-taught.
So the academic learning that so many people think is important to become a great artist, they simply disregard and go forward making art.
Sort of the definition of folk art is self-taught art. Jimmy Lee sort of taught himself. He's never studied art at anybody's school.
Not everyone can afford a $100,000 MFA program. With the popularization of MFA programs since the 1970s, as a way for visual artists to become working professionals, it's just not something that everyone can afford. So I think that there's been this big widening in terms of our understanding of creativity, who's allowed to do it, and how we understand it and accept it within the art world.
I know what a shock it is to go to college without a single penny in my pocket. I couldn't buy a bar of soap or afford an iron. I went around the showers picking up bits of soap and had to stay on the college grounds at Christmas because I didn't have the fare home and nobody to send me a cent. So I know a little about what loneliness and humiliation is, and I know what a challenge it is to live up north in New York in my old age with the cold weather freezing up my ideas as well as my body. I would sit in the kitchen wrapped up like a mummy, and when the words began to run together on the pages I read, I would heat up some big stones I got from the excavation sites in the slums where I lived in Yonkers, and I would put them in my bed and go to sleep.
She was freezing at night. She would, heat up a rock and put it in bed with her, and she didn't have enough food often, and yet she would be up all night into 24-hour shifts producing. And I think it's because her messages had something to do beside it. They weren't just representing her personal ideas, but they were larger thoughts about what's happening.
Everything with me is spontaneous. I came out of the womb singing. That's what my mother said. And it's like music is just a part of me. It's who I am.
What fuels your own creativity?
I think what we talked about at the beginning was the tension in the very beginning. I mean, my childhood, the parents were so unbelievably uncreative.
I'm still arguing with Tolstoy, I think, who said all happy families are the same, and it's the unhappy ones that provide the tension. And I've actually never understood why that is so, why happiness isn't as complex as unhappiness.
Well, I suppose because by nature, happiness requires a certain lack of intelligence.
So good. I remember finding a porno magazine when I was about 9 or 10 years old and flipping through it, and my father caught me looking through it. And turns out I wasn't actually looking at all the naked women. I was looking at an article on punk rock. And he was so offended by it. He couldn't believe that I was doing, I'm reading this and I'm looking, oh my God, these guys are like, playing on stage and they're rolling around in broken glass. And, it's just amazing, like how much, what these guys are doing, the way they look, the way that, I imagined they sound because I didn't know. And he was so mad. And I was like, that's exactly what I want. I mean, he sat me down and can't look at this, punk rock. It's terrible. You don't ever want to go in that direction. And I was like, man, that is my direction. and I did.
I've been an artist all my life. I was classically trained in art, but then I started making my own rules, just like the folk artist I so admire. I feel more comfortable with them, with their instinctive eye, their indifference to money, with their use of found materials. From the wreckage of the world around me came my art, a large body of work that in the end journeyed its way back to my hometown in Alabama.
I know in my own personal collecting of outsider art, the artists are not well known, they're not terribly celebrated. There are a few of them, of course, that have been, but still there's a lot of those artists that we haven't discovered yet.
Yeah, that's the exciting part.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope you'll see the film. Thank you.